So my name is Christian Ost, and I used to be I'm economist, and one of the person involved in the C-ship program developed by the ISHEC Brussels Business School. I used to be the dean and director years ago about this same school. So I know how everything is functioning there, and I must say welcome to you and thank you for joining that, because I will replace, substitute to Ruba Saleh. Dr. Ruba Saleh connected you certainly, and she's wonderful because the Ruba is a person able to do three things or four things at the same time. But unfortunately, she gives a lecture today, and she don't have the ubiquity to be able to be at two places at the same time. So not yet. So I will try to replace her for this webinar. This is the second webinar in the fourth year of the fourth session that we organized, the cultural entrepreneurship teaching program at the business school. So this webinar, as you know, will be focused on cultural entrepreneurship and social return on investment. We will have here three speakers today. I will introduce maybe each of you and let you, each of you, 15 minutes maybe, or about 15 minutes to describe and to make your presentation. And after that, I would suggest that maybe at the end, after the three presentation, to collect some questions. We will have question and answer time, of course, and there's no obligation, but if, of course, this could happen, that will be fine. So no other presentation. I think that we will go into directly into the real thing, and so I suggest that we started, as indicated, with Kai Brennert. I'd like to introduce you maybe in a few words. You're the founder of Edge and Story, an evaluation and research consultancy at the intersection of culture and sustainable development. You're currently based in Cambodia. You have lived in Germany, Thailand, Iraq, Kurdistan, Australia, the UK, New Zealand, so around the world. Clearly, if this is not a multicultural or international profile, I don't know what it is. And you work so in more than 20 countries across 4 continents on partnerships, strategy, evaluation. You're also the author of Curious Patterns. You may maybe probably explain more about that. A monthly newsletter that explores current issues and policies in the field of arts, impact, international cooperation, and sustainable development. So thank you for joining us, and I give you the floor. If you can share your screen, we will be, yeah, seems okay. So you get the floor.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for the nice introduction and the invitation, first of all. So you already started introducing me, and now I'm coming to the point where I'm introducing myself. So yes, my name is Kai. I'm originally from Germany, but I'm in Cambodia, even though like being currently based here sounds a bit off because I've been in and out of Cambodia since 2015. So quite a while already. But what I do is as was mentioned, I run Edge and Story. It's just turned 3 years old, this little consultancy, where we do a lot of evaluation, research work on policy and strategy in arts, culture, heritage, creative industries, at the intersection of all the other interesting stuff, like where life happens, where sustainability happens, where development cooperation happens. all the interesting things. And I think this is why the connection to SRI came to be. While I haven't directly worked with the concept of social return on investment, like directly as a methodology, I've worked in the wider field of looking at the many different impact levels of arts and culture, quite certainly. So what I do want to talk about first is where I usually find myself in, is an in-between role. So we're talking about cultural entrepreneurship, but I see myself as a cultural entrepreneur myself in a way. But I do find myself in this in-between role quite often, doing evaluation work and doing research work, where you're sitting between a funder and a grantee, or you're negotiating between policy and practice, or you're trying to see, whether the aspirations match the operations. It always changes a little bit, but it's always fundamentally this intermediary or in-between role, where sometimes you're translating, sometimes you're actively facilitating, sometimes you're just connecting the dots, bring people together. And there's something I'll be coming back to later on as well. But maybe more importantly, why culture, right? And why am I working in this field? And I mean, everybody has their own origin story, how we got there. But for me, the things that really started to make sense was when we look at curiosity that arts and culture managed to spark in me and in other people. The unique way that imagination grows out of it, but also gives fuel to it. The experimentation that happens in and through cultural practice and evolves through it, and obviously the expression that we find in ourselves and can bring out through that. So all those different things here, it's just introduction, right? You're all familiar with that, but I think it's very important when we're thinking about the social, but also many other impact vectors maybe of arts and culture. But precisely because of that, now I'm trying to bridge over to sustainable development and sustainability. I do believe this exactly why it is uniquely located to actually be the foundation of sustainable development and regenerative futures as well. We can talk about that in a second. We wrote a little report about that for the British Council last year, called The Missing Foundation, a follow-up to The Missing Pillar, where we looked at culture's place within and beyond the UN's development goals. Maybe critically looking at why the limitations of the SDGs, but at the same time, how culture is very much the foundation and an enabling factor of sustainable development, rather than perhaps just a tool or instrument or a catalyst. I'm not going to go very, very deep into that. Maybe later on there's a question we can look at a little bit more deeply, or you can read it. It's out there, this report. What it does do at the very end is it looks at systems, because what we fundamentally to do is think about the harmful systems that we are part of and that are around us. And I mean, the spiral here, from the conventional practice, we're starting to green the bad practices. We're at sustainability, I think the quote is really nice, 100% less bad. But 100% less bad is not necessarily good, is it? We're not restoring all that we have destroyed. We're not starting to reconcile with what is around it. We're not actively creating better at this point. And, you know, it might sound very conceptual, but I think, again, this is where arts and culture does have its very, very unique role to play, to be that regenerative force that we need. And if we think about systems, this is where we really need to start changing them. All of us will have to play a role in that. And, you know, that was very conceptual, perhaps very abstract. What the heck is this guy talking about? I want to loop it back to me as I said, a cultural entrepreneur who also works with cultural entrepreneurs. Because what part of this, of that ecosystem am I actually addressing in my work as an evaluator, as a researcher, as somebody who works with governments, with foundations, with cultural NGOs, with activists, with artists. As I mentioned earlier, like the very unique thing about doing this particular kind of work, actually this in-between role really allows me a very precious position where I'm usually brought in actively. I'm not already there. I'm being brought in to do something. And this role can shift, right? Sometimes this role is maybe being a friend of the process, you know, somebody who's along the ride, and can give advice, or, you know, maybe it's like, oh, okay, maybe we can shape it this way. It can be critical eye, you know, maybe a step further back, and it's just like, oh, I've observed this or that. It can be a partner who's seen a whole lot of stuff, right? Because obviously you work a lot across a lot of projects, so you have experiences that you can throw in. It's like, oh, I've seen this before. I know how this film ends, and I didn't like it. But also sometimes, you know, maybe you're just a workhorse who needs to bring in what is missing in a certain decision-making process on a strategic vision, you know. So this in-between role I find very, very important, especially when we're talking about this complexity. But, oh gosh, what am I doing? Where I also find myself in, obviously, is the messy in between, right? Because those processes are never clear cut, right? We have to confront project logic, you know. It's like, oh, something starts and something stops. How can we actually work on deeper impact, you know, towards sustainability, towards social outcomes, if we only think in start stop, right? That is very much connected to funding systems. If we're thinking about cultural entrepreneurship and creative economy narratives, you know, we always have a certain economic growth paradigm that we need to confront and always need to come back to. And it's like, hey, what about all the other fantastic aspects of life outside of economy? You know, competing political interests, you know. I'm regularly working in authoritarian, totalitarian context as well, or with the development industry, you know, and the legacies of colonialism. So how do you reconcile all of this? Because, you know, talking about systems and wanting to change systems, this unique position inside is where I believe we can actually push the envelope a little, because it is the work of evaluation, research, and working with data and trying to understand things, giving insights, helping with visions, maybe facilitating conversations, is actually a very important reflective function. I believe is necessary for us to actually craft those systems for the future, for better and more hopeful futures. But again, how am I doing this? How am I doing this? Very precisely, because again, we're in the very conceptual. Let's break it down maybe a little. I see that usually this change needs to, or maybe not needs to happen, maybe it actually needs a radical change, but the way I'm working is very much in increments. And I've got 4 little examples of how I maybe structure those increments towards changing. The first one is about data, and how I approach data. And I believe that since we're working in arts and culture, number one, but also we're engaging with the entire world around us, we need to consider everything around us as data. You know, we cannot just say only quantitative data is the real thing. But even when it comes to qualitative data, there's so much that is often not recognized by maybe the academy, the Western academy, or something that is not necessarily fully understood by us humans. You know, when I'm talking about all data, I'm considering data that is maybe embodied, you know, data that comes from emotion, data that comes from relationship. There's so many ways to look at the world around us and trying to make sense of it that we haven't discovered, or we haven't tried to make sense of the sense making, that I try to be very, very open to all those kinds of data, even data within art and data embodied in culture. I think is something we need to look at more intensely in order to make you know, the next step. Another one is feedback loops. Might sound easy, might sound like something, oh yeah, of course we need to have feedback loops, but who's actively implementing that, especially when we're in policy context, right? When we're thinking about participation and participatory engagement models, when we're talking about learning, right? We need to make sure that there is a constant flow of back and forth, right? That there's an exchange and a dialogue. Last year, I was working with the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts in Cambodia on a vision for the creative industries in the country, and we worked with 120 artists, cultural practitioners, people working in the creative industries, formulating an ideal future they might have, right, in order to create a non-confrontational feedback to the ministry, which took it on board. But at the same time, we also had a visual artist there who was taking all of that in, analyzing it, feeding it back to the people to create a feedback loop that also went to the ministry itself. The ministry took it to other ministries. In the end, we had a research sharing where there was multiple feedback loops happening. You know, it's not perfect, it's very messy most of the time, but if we don't have that feedback on a constant level, then I don't think we're hearing each other, and we're probably running in circles. Indicators. In the work of evaluation, you work with a lot of indicators, usually indicators that help you to tell a story, that indicate where things are going or not. And sadly, because of things like funders logic, because of project cycles, indicators tend to be usually very dull, very boring. In the worst case, they don't actually indicate anything. They just tell you how many people came to an event. You know, today we have 14 participants I see in the corner up there. That might not be a huge number, but if those 14 people are the right people, then this is way more impactful than having 140 here who are not listening and not taking anything away from it. All right. But thinking about what else could a creative indicator be? How can else we work with indicators? So I try to bring in new indicators that I believe help tell an interesting new story. So in a recent evaluation, actually a current evaluation that I'm doing in a program working with municipalities that have developed cultural development strategies, we asked what people consider enough impact. Because if we're thinking about, you know, all those different impact levels, you know, in the first place, you need to be able to formulate what that impact means to you, right? And when have you achieved something? So asking people to articulate what is enough impact is surprisingly a really interesting indicator that we've discovered and we're working with right now. Obviously, there's a lot more. And the last one is artists. I said I'm working in this field, consider myself to be part of this field, but quite often I'm still the non-artist talking about artists because I have a background in arts management and in cultural policy. Don't have a creative practice myself. So I've started to bring in artists as co-researchers and co-evaluators because of all the things that I mentioned earlier, why I'm even working in this field, recognizing the unique approaches they have to research and evaluation design, to data collection, to even sense making and data analysis, not as, people to merely interpret what I and my colleagues are finding, but bringing them in as sparring partners, as creative sparring partners, as people who do the same work just through a different perspective. And I hope this is kind of touching a little bit on the overall idea of how arts and culture is much more than what it may seem, and how we can all be part of it. But if this is still not enough for you, I invite you to subscribe to Curious Patterns, which is my newsletter that is not coming out monthly anymore because I'm not as disciplined, but maybe every 2 or 3 months, where I'm usually collating a bunch of resources for people that are interested in this wider topic, to read through, click through, and sometimes you might also catch an opinion or an angry rant. So thank you very much. Really looking forward to the other 2 presentations.
Thank you so much, Kai. You don't listen the applause, but there is some, you see, there's a way we do online thing. We really appreciate that and your contribution. We will, and I see applause on the screen. We will, of course, come back with question. I don't know, except if there is really some urgent question right now, I can give you the floor. Otherwise, keep maybe your question for the question and answer place. But tell me if you ask. We are not a very large group, so that should not be difficult to deal with that. So thank you, because I really appreciate the thing that and your contribution is more about the teasing about. We would like, maybe it's inspiring. You would like to know more and much, but I appreciate the fact that you make this relationship between culture and the sustainable development goals, for example, because, as you know, there is a long discussion there about where is culture in the sustainable development goals. Is it the side? Is it transversal? Is it inside? Is it the focus? Is it above everything? It is probably, there is probably, as you explain, no clear answer to that. It is everywhere and it is nowhere, but it's not that important that we have a number of sustainable development goals, number 18 or number 19, being culture is more important, that we let some of the process going on. And you mentioned also about that, the need for in between, for facilitator. So what your experience probably brings along, and I must say that in my field of cultural heritage economics, I sometimes refer to this mediator function about architect and about conservation specialists, because they also are not just experts. They need to bring people together on the table and to find some compromise. And so it's a tricky question. It's a tricky and complex situation that I think that you bring a really insight, a very clear insight about that. I suggest, if there is no urgent question right now, that we can go forward. And of course, Kai, you can remain and come back later with other questions that I have or that some of the people in the room get. So I just suggest to go to our second speaker of the day. So I will go to Nancy, because Karen, I don't know if you could have been able to contact maybe Sabrina, or if she know we will go to the second speech by Nancy, because she's ready here to share her screen. Thank you for joining us, Nancy. Nancy Duxbury is senior researcher, coordinator of the research group Urban Cultures, Sociabilities and Participation, which is culture, which is, if I'm right about, at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Okay, coordinator of the Creator Observatory, a member of the European Expert Network of Culture, which is, as we know, a very important important organizational place to be. She holds a PhD in communication from Simon Fraser University in Canada, specializing in cultural development and policy in regard to book publishing. Her current research focuses on CCIs, cultural and creative industries in non-urban areas, culture and local sustainability, culture-based development in small cities and rural areas, cultural mapping, and also cultural planning. So I give you the floor, Nancy, for your contribution.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate today, and to also an opportunity to meet and learn from my co-presenters, and hopefully Sabrina will get here shortly. But it's been very interesting meeting Kai and listening to your presentation, and there's a few overlaps, but I will just continue because I'm very conscious of time. So we'll see. But let's see, I'll start by sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Let's see. This one. Okay.
Perfect.
Should be fine. Okay. I guess I've taken parts out because I'm going to present two projects that I've directed, just to give you some sense of where I'm coming from in regards to how I think about cultural entrepreneurship and some of the, I guess, follow-on impacts that can happen in the various contexts, particularly looking at smaller places and rural areas. And I took out slides relating to cultural sustainability, but I'm very, as I think the bio somewhere said, I'm very interested in the role of culture in particularly local sustainable development. And I've recently went back 20 years looking at some of the earlier writings about it that really took a local perspective. And it was really about making it meaningful in your place. And I think it would be valuable to go back to that today, but I didn't. Let's see what else. And I guess the other through line that you'll see in these projects is an interest in how culture is sustained and activated and made vibrant, and how it can be catalyzed for new initiatives. And I guess the flip side is how it can be supported. So I'll just start. Let's see. So the first project I'm going to talk to you about is Creator, which was based in Portugal, and it's based on finding an umbrella to connect culture and tourism sectors in small places. And what we did, I'm just going to close these here. It was a project that was from 2016 to June 2020, in the midst of the COVID period. It was defined as a research and application project. And this is something else that I think defines my work. in that it wasn't just a research project, but it really integrated cultural agents and various organizations that took on this challenge and tried to change the way that research does, as Kai said, from the inside, and tried to make little steps forward. I'll discuss a little bit in a moment more about that. So we had an experiment, I guess, to take on this idea of what could connect cultural and tourism agents and others who may be interested in activating the culture of their location for new initiatives. We basically defined our field as small cities and rural areas, which in Portugal meant anything outside of Lisbon and Porto was our operating area, and it was very much based on the mainland. We had 2 calls for pilots, and out of that, we ended up with 40 different organizations who were selected, which originally we thought would be cultural organizations, but it turned out not to be the case. So we ended up with initiatives being propelled by municipalities, by individuals, and small businesses in culture and tourism and in other areas. Also nonprofit organizations in the cultural or local development fields, as well as 4 intersectoral partnerships that were often involving municipalities, NGOs, museums, in various arrangements to create projects for this initiative. There. It was never meant to be only a tourism project, but it was always looking at how to bring together tourism, culture, and local regional development. Oops, a second there. And just to say a few words on creative tourism, which was our umbrella. This is really a niche sort of activity that involves small numbers, as you can see here, actively involved in creation, learning something new about an activity, but also about the place, about the significance of that cultural outcome or cultural experience, and whatever else is tied to that. We definitely did not want any sort of fill in the blank kind of approach. So everybody, the idea would you facilitate platforms for creative self-expression, and that you would be linked to the local community. So you aren't just in an artist studio isolated from anything outside. And under all of this, the place where these things occurred was significant in terms of how it inspired, informed, and interconnected these pieces to make very unique experiences possible, informed by both tangible and intangible cultural heritage of the place. One of the significant, I guess, features of the project was its involvement of practitioners as co-researchers in the project. And so it became quite evident early on that it was going to be a lot about learning through and with practice. Nobody knew how to sustain such an creative tourism. First of all, there had been no research on what creative tourism really looks like in a rural area, how to sustain it, how to configure it, what it might be formulated like, or anything else. So we didn't really know what would work. So with 40 different pilots, we had a big variety of different sort of approaches, different types of entities. And it was an experiment where they are on the front lines, they are making the decisions, they are the ones meeting the visitors, and learning from them and with them was really core to everything. This, of course, isn't always easy for researchers to absorb, because there's, as I discovered, there's a lot of self-identity and confidence that is associated with your role in society. And for researchers, they were to be the researchers, not others who were to tell them their knowledge, and they were to translate it. And we tried to break that up completely. So this was, we discovered in a lot of assessment, this was learning as we go, but that it really was valuable to have spaces, ongoing spaces for knowledge exchange in both formal and informal ways. We had almost 4 years to get to know each other, regional and national meetings. two regional in each of the regions and one national each year. And we learned a lot through those informal discussions and different exercises. And the other two pieces are kind of flip sides of a coin, where one was enabling practitioners to take on the role of a co-researcher. So it wasn't just being interviewed, but it was being part of that knowledge development process and changing the norms of relations. And on the other side, it was fostering researchers' close attention to how the research and the knowledge being developed was useful for the practice, not only to let them know what happened at the end of the project, but as it was emerging in the project during the period, and otherwise continually thinking beyond their normal research work roles. And as I said, this isn't always easy for some. And so when we hit the beyond your comfort zone periods, that was really telling that we had done something right and that there was something there to learn about and going forward. So we're continuing to build with this. I will have some references I'll put in the chat after. The project itself, we have a documentary, which is really the best way of learning about it and its outcomes and its intentions and outcomes. And we've also developed an creator observatory, which you mentioned, coming out of this project to try to continue having those networks alive, but also expanding and enabling us to foster the sort of interconnections and the knowledge sharing that weren't always possible during this limited period of a project. Let's see, I guess in terms of outcomes, just to say quickly there before I go on to the second project, that we did learn that this creative tourism approach, and let me just really enabled places, in particular, say municipalities, regional development agencies, those type of organizations that are thinking about how to create new values of the resources and the specificities of their place, as ways of adding value without having to build another museum, for instance, thinking differently about not only the cultural activities, but the knowledge that resides within the community that lives there. And even historical knowledge of what it's like to grow up by the elders in these sometimes very remote places, and that all of this knowledge is valuable, and all of this can be facilitated within something that is meaningful, that helps that brings benefits to both the visitor and the community, enables local residents to have benefits from tourists arriving where they normally would not have even been thought about in terms of being part of the tourism area, and otherwise breaking down those sometimes self-imposed barriers of different sectors. And I guess just speak briefly to the social return. One of the things we did discover is that because we had such a wide variety of organizations involved, the motivations also were quite different in terms of why they were part of this project. And there was quite a lot of research to look at their motivations and whether it was cultural tourism or local development in general, regional development, and it wasn't always straightforward as to who had their eye on which area the most. But altogether, it really helped show us the complexity of all of this activity and who is interested in taking cultural resources, both tangible and intangible, and making something of them for the future. And having said that, we were very much an R&D stage, and so now, of course, the big issue is how do you make that sustainable? Some organizations have continued, some have folded during the COVID period, and otherwise we're learning with them how best to go forward. The second project, and I still have a sip of water, is active now, and this is in situ. The longer title of it is Place-Based Innovation of Cultural and Creative Industries in Non-Urban Areas. It's a European project. That started in mid-2022 and will be continuing through to mid-2026. And the background of the project, I won't go into it a lot because I want to show you some of the things we're learning, is that non-urban areas, and in particular cultural and creative actors, enterprises or ecosystems or industries, depending on how you want to define this or label them, have been almost completely ignored by research and policy, who have chosen to focus on cities for such a long time. Although it does seem that's changing at the moment. What this has created is a lot of knowledge deficits, gaps, and partial glances of one place at one piece of time, part of time with only an economic lens, or another one only looking at the value to the community, or all these little bits and pieces that don't all add up to anything cohesive. We find this also leads into a lack of guidance of any sort for policy approaches and support for periphery-based cultural and creative organizations and agents that can be adapted or to the unique characteristics of each situation. Rural is a huge brush that involves a lot of different types of situations, and we understand clearly that there's so many unique situations that coming up with a way of supporting cultural actors who are also diverse, of course, in those different contexts is a challenge, and it's something that it's time to start to address. So our goal is to better understand the forms, the processes, the governance needs of cultural and creative actors located in non-urban areas of Europe, and at the same time, to help their practice advance, to advance the ability of these actors to act as drivers of innovation, competitiveness, and sustainability for the places where they're located. So we really hope it's much more than a research project, but that it will have something significant in changing conditions on the ground in the areas in which we are working, but also more generally in non-urban areas. Okay, I'll say a few words on how we're organized as a project. We have 3 dimensions. So one is research, which I'll talk a little bit about today, which is very multidisciplinary and multi-layered. We have a capacity building wing that has involved on-site workshops in each of the 6 locations. I'll show you where we're working, as well as online access, and then we're now going to phase 2 of that. And this has been combined with mentorship of each of our case studies that we're working with to give that closer attention to the issues that they're dealing with and as they evolve. So research, capacity building, and policy and planning recommendations, looking not only at cultural policy, but also innovation and rural development policy, and looking at how all of these different structures might come together to help support and recognize and support cultural and creative work in non-urban areas. So where we're working is we have 6 labs set up, or that we're calling them, which are really regions in 6 different locations of Europe. So the Azores in Portugal, where I'm speaking to you from today, the western coastal periphery of Ireland, the west region of Iceland, Roma and Yuroki West Coast and Baltic Sea Archipelago in Finland, Valmiera County in the north of Latvia, and Šibenik County in Croatia. We have 13 partners. The ones in green on your screen are our lab partners, and they are located 1 per each of these 6 lab areas, and they are our conduit to what's happening on the ground and the cultural and creative actors in those locations. And the others, I don't have time to go into them all, but are coming in with various areas of expertise that are helping inform the work that we're doing overall, and particularly being implemented in these labs. In addition to the labs and the cultural and creative ecosystems, in each of those labs, we've selected 2 organizations who are implementing creative responses to local issues that were identified within a previous step within the project. And through these 12 organizations, we're planning to track and monitor and also learn with them as to what issues they encounter, what opportunities emerge, and how they are trying to implement something innovative and new in a rural location, and how that goes over basically 2 years at least, and hopefully to be a seed for these initiatives to go further beyond the time of the project. And just quickly, we also are accompanied by an outreach array of organizations, which we hope will enable our attention to non-urban cultural and creative work to be transmitted internationally, and to also be a seed for more international discussions about the importance of this section of the cultural sector. In our research, we have some wide European-wide or even international scans that are all on our website. We have a number of community engaged research initiatives on the ground to learn from cultural and creative actors primarily, but also the general community. And then we have our case studies, which are looking at social issues, placemaking, tourism, environmental sustainability, internal challenges of the cultural and creative sector, and industrial innovation, and often multiple of those issues at the same time. We are finding, I think I'm running out. Okay. We are finding that, of course, innovation, when you're talking about it in non-urban areas, is not technological, although that's always the first thing that you see in a lot of the policy documents, but it's mainly social, cultural, and institutional in nature. And these innovations arise from actions taken by local actors or groups. So they're not something that gets parachuted in, at least in the scheme, in the areas that we're looking at, and in the cultural creative agents. It's really locally rooted and locally driven. And we've done some research, literature reviews, looking at important drivers of innovation in the cultural creative industries in non-urban areas. What we're finding is that when we look on the ground with our work research, with our case studies, it's much more complex than what you would quote from a research paper. So what we're seeing is geographical proximity and the ability to transfer knowledge and exchange knowledge melded with social capital is turning into a high demand and desire for networks and platforms for relating, sharing, and cooperation, which include the need for mediators between different types of organizations, individuals, and even sectors, and also external connections and exchanges. This is actually the topic of a number of the projects that are being implemented, because this is so important. It seems to be the missing piece in a lot of these regions. People may be inspired by cultural heritage, but we see an attitude of not only being inspired by what's there, but wanting to improve the locale, to enhance place resources, to create more interesting places, and be a much more involved relationship there. And local demand is also seen as a driver of innovation, but we're seeing that translated into more about community engagement, making a difference in your place, and also incorporating tourism as well as local demand in terms of finding models for being sustainable going forward. We're also very interested in the importance of place, the realization and of the importance of particularities of place in cultural production, and that culture and creativity are place-based entities, which of course is nice to see after the era of creative cities, where the idea of creativity would just bounce into your location and create whatever it creates without any real need to be locally attached. Whereas this is completely opposite take. We're also finding some old 20-year-old work that had looked at the effects of place on creative work, looking at place as a resource, as a stage for a network, a place where the reputations or traditions can influence the outcome of what you do, and also place as a place as where your community or your tribe lives and operates, and that you want to be within that. We're also noticing beyond this sort of desire of giving to community and all of that, the importance of place for enabling creativity to happen, and in free ways that are specific to an individual, not individualized isolation. But this is an example, but also the idea that creative cultural innovation is also happening in these spaces. This is an example from Iceland, from the region that's part of our labs. And it's an individual who is, I think, trained as a painter, but has developed this huge fascination with music as well. And this main picture is rhubarb. It's a rhubarb garden that I think is hundreds years old or something. It's like an old family farm from which he is designing musical instruments. And these were live until I turned it into a PDF. Xylophones, flutes, and other things. He also has a fascination with the rocks in that area, on the farm and in that area, and is converting them into musical instruments, which are perfectly tuned xylophones and things like this, as well as other sculptures, and is then touring internationally with the Icelandic bands because it brings a completely different sound. It's also a welcoming spot for different musicians in Iceland to come and play with sounds as they're looking at their next work, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not only about these socially oriented initiatives or business oriented industries, but there's also this aspect of just being an artist in these locations. We are finding that as we go forward, the view of culture happens in cities and not in the urban areas. And if it happens in the non-urban areas, it's something that people have exported from the cities, is crashing a little bit, at least in our, and we're hoping to bring the narrative forward that these areas are active sites of creativity and hubs of cultural production. They have, these individuals have a lot of challenges from the isolation, from connectivity, from this base milieu of support for what they do, but that there's something there, and it's attached in an engaged way to the communities where these creative individuals are working and creating, and it's also something that the unique features of these places, with their combination of the cultural heritage, the natural beauty, the local practices and traditions, and other distinctive resources, are igniting ideas and possibilities for new ventures. And I know I have no more time, so I'll put this link onto the chat. But we do have now really short videos of between 2 and 5 minutes from each of our 12 case studies, introducing what they're aspiring to do. And each of them, as I was going through again, we're witnessing these processes of ideation, iterative experimentation, imagining different possibilities, sharing ideas in groups, particularly with youth, determining collectively what to do next, and developing these initiatives that have some economic base, but also have a social base and a cultural base, and are working through what these things might become and how they can influence the places where they are located. And I will stop there. And I know I've went over time. Apologies, but it's sort of in the middle of everything, so it's still very messy as we're determining what we're learning. But it's become really fascinating, and it's these inspiring individuals that are just going off and creating something brand new in that they see as needed in their community. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. See, warm applause. And by the way, and I guess this is also an ongoing process somehow, and that of course. So what you just show is just a part, I guess, about about all the outcomes and the benefit of there. I think that this is really, that goes really into some very important issue, as you mentioned, and the two example, creator and in situ, and both of them are dealing at the same time with values, cultural values, and tangible and intangible heritage. And I was thinking about the craftsmanship, maybe also for the creator experience, which is a way to raising awareness about the heritage, I guess, which is of course a baseline also about what we are doing here and what we're doing, especially in Europe. And the other thing is that about the rural areas, we sometimes too often speak about the vibrant city and the vibrant urban places, but rural areas can also be vibrant, because there is some, what, as you explained and you understood, some specific culture related to where they come from the environment, from the place as it is, from the natural resources probably, and the landscape and so on, which is truly interesting to me. Thank you for this contribution. So at this stage, I just wonder, I see Sabrina is there. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah?
Good afternoon,
Okay.
everyone.
Okay, nice to have you among us. So I will, Nancy and Kai, you of course able to stay with us, and we will see about question and answer in a moment. We will not go over to take too much time on that. But Sabrina, if you can share with us your screen and make your presentation, I will. Is it possible?
Yeah, sure.
That you can try to
I'm trying to share right now.
During this time, I will just maybe a short introduction. You're Sabrina Camilli, as a cultural actor based in Casablanca with a high interest in the emergence and development of the cultural and creative sectors in Morocco and on the continent. Since 2019, you've been responsible for development and partnership within l'Observatoire, the Observatory, Art and Research, which is located in Casablanca, Morocco. L'Observatoire designs, produces, and disseminates projects conceived as tools to support Moroccan contemporary creation nationally and internationally. It seeks to create the necessary conditions for projects unsuited to the current systems of artistic, academic, and cultural production in the region to flourish and to present the project to a Moroccan and international audience, bringing together artists, researchers, and the general public. A nice goal and a nice inspiring introduction to you. So if you can share your screen.
First, I'm glad to join the discussion today alongside Kai and Nancy, and thank you for the fascinating insights. I will briefly and mainly focus on cultural entrepreneurship, humbly maybe adding a North African perspective to our conversation. I'm Sabrina, I'm based in Casablanca, Morocco. First, just to say my English is a bit rusty because I'm a French and Arabic speaker, so if I stumble or if anything doesn't make sense, please feel free to interrupt. So I wanted today to touch maybe 2 or 3 points. First, what is the tension between creativity and economic viability in our current landscape of support of cultural entrepreneurship in Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, and Algeria? And secondly, why is it important to measure economic and social return in our context again? Before I dive in, I just want to mention I have a few photos just to provide the visual support. for the presentation to make it more pleasant. So about the tension between creativity and economic viability, something I know many of us feel deeply as a cultural entrepreneurs. We often find ourselves torn between our passion for creation and the pressing need to secure funding. I believe from the point of view here and the many entrepreneurs we've met in our region, it's not just about balancing profit and creativity. And in a sense, it's almost a false dichotomy. It's rather more about articulating the value of our work in a way that will resonate with the others. And how can we do that? That's the real conversation. In our context in Morocco, the cultural entrepreneurship, it's still something very emerging. In fact, there isn't even a legal recognition. The statute of a cultural company is not recognized by the government or the tax authorities yet. But we are still optimistic in the sense that the advocacy efforts are underway, and I think it will change in the very close horizon. There's various initiatives in Morocco that have been launched to foster entrepreneurship. Maybe I'll just go through the diapositive to show you. Well, this is some of the programs. In particular, we've seen the rise in the late years of the artist entrepreneur model, which is really inspiring and triggering. The state has created that statute especially to get people out of the informal sector. And there's a very low tax rate of 1 to 2%. So in consequences, we've seen the number of artists switching to that statute of entrepreneur rise. There's actually a question I hear, and we hear a lot coming from young artists in our region, coming from young cultural entrepreneurs. And the question is the following: how can we maintain our artistic and cultural integrity while engaging with the market? And that's a tougher question that it seems. We believe that to recognize the interplay between the art and the business, it really requires a lot of nuance and a lot of knowledge exchange. In that sense, I really agree with something that Nancy said earlier about personal identities and the importance of having spaces for exchange, both formal and informal spaces for exchange. I would say maybe in our geographical context in North Africa, that the informal is not something accessory, but it's really an essential. And Nancy also mentioned a point I would like to expand on, because there is for now a division in the way here in Morocco we evaluate on the one side the economic value, and on the other side, the value created for the community. I think if the art sectors and if the artists teach us something, it's that we need to increasingly break down the siloed thinking, including in how we conduct evaluation, how we conduct measurement, impact on territories. And regarding, so I'm switching to the second point, which is the importance of measuring economic and social return on investment for cultural and creative entrepreneurship. I also believe that measuring the return on investment, it's not about just adding new KPIs or making small tweaks to what we already have as a paradigm of value evaluation. We need to engage in real conversation with all stakeholders. And this first to start with the young entrepreneurs, the young artists, but also the incubators, the funding bodies, the bank system, and really have that conversation about what value creation truly means, especially in our context where intangible heritage and oral history takes a major part. To me as researcher, it's fascinating that until maybe a decade ago, when we spoke about the impact, we were mostly focused on direct microeconomic effects. I mean, in Morocco, I know that the research has been going on in Europe for longer than that, but here it's a lot about how many jobs were created, how much economic activity were generated. I see there's a shift toward now a broader thinking, and how we can emphasize aspects like training, capacity building, incubation, and so on. So in my opinion, we've seen a lot of tools developed that have been fixated on improving economic performance. And I think the conversation is very, it's deeply interesting. Yes, financial and economic numbers matters, but what about like the real impact we're having, and how can we measure that? And here's what it gets tricky at some point, because all the traditional measurement that only have a look at the job creation, they don't cut it anymore, and they fail to capture the full scope of what creative organization here in our context, in our Moroccan context, are creating. So we need to figure out what indicators are relevant for assessing our impact, and how can we maybe change the whole paradigm in how we evaluate the value creation. Being honest, measuring the impact isn't a straightforward science. If we want to capture something that is diverse and as intangible as value creation, it can be influenced by various factors that are often beyond the control of the social cultural enterprise itself. So the question that is raised is, how do we ensure that we're recognizing this varied contribution? And this is a question that's strongly, that we need to explore as we navigate the social economic landscape here, because I think for now we're just taking, you know, the old tools and the old methods, and we don't really take the time to rethink and be creative about what method we are using. It's probably time to move beyond the merely adding just new KPIs and truly understanding what is creation, you know, like what is the value that we are creating, and how can we really evaluate it and measure it. So it's just a brief experience from here in Morocco. I don't know if you see the screen yet. It's a quick example on a study we worked on. This is the festival, music festival in Essaouira. Maybe some of you are familiar with. It's Gnawa music. So the study was conducted in 2022. And the approach is quite classical, to be honest. They looked at the value creation and for, how to say that, la literie, I'm sorry. The impact on tourism for connects economic and like restaurants and hotels, etc. But even this study that used quite old-fashioned methods, still, it proved that every dirham, which is like 10 cents, euros, generate 17 times the impact for the city. I'm sorry. So, I mean, we don't have a lot of research yet. There's not a lot of study conducted, since the importance for us is especially to create those spaces, and that we have more tangible numbers that we can, you know, reinforce the pledge. I don't know. I'm sorry, because I've been switching from Arabic to French since the morning, so it's a bit hard. But yes, again, if you have any question, and I'll be happy if we can maybe have opened the discussion and follow up from there.
Okay. No, thank you, Sabrina. That was very clear. By the way, we understand what you're doing there, and I think that's important that you came back on this return on social return on investment, saying that what is it's not just measuring a classical ROI with bringing some, you see, social thing inside, but there is a shift in methodologies that we need. That this is really consistent with what Kai started to say about data. Data is not everything, and that we need, of course, to rely also to be able to measure imagination, curiosity, as he said. To me, what also is related to intangible and to the cultural context of, let's say, Africa, Asia, or Europe. Or there are different ways to put the real importance on some KPIs or on something else that could better refer to what people like and people feel. And of course, this is important to look at. No, time is flying, but we have maybe just 3 or 4 minutes about, but we can go, of course. I would like to ask maybe. So if you have any question to Kai, Nancy, or Sabrina, it's the moment. If you want to ask a question or clarification, or by the way, I would like also to mention, I see in the chat about Aline make a chat telling a good news to me, the fact that the Mondia Cult Declaration, I wasn't aware about that, to bring culture as a SDGs in 2030-45, but we will see. We will see, because it can be also a wishful maybe thinking, but I hope that goes in the good direction. So I don't know if you have a question. If I may start, I have a question for Kai, related to the experience that you get with the municipality or the government, at the government level, and about bringing these people together. You explain about the feedbacks and the loops that were created that. Just a question about the reaction about the government about that. You have an experience by having been in different contexts, governmental context, I would say, or decision-making context. How is it easy to deal with authorities, I would say, in that field?
Yeah, I mean, the approach that we took, the approach of inviting everyone to imagine what a future could look like, was very deliberate, because quite often in that context, when we have the cultural civil society and the cultural private sector talk to the government in some forum or another, it becomes quite confrontational. In some of the contexts I've worked in, definitely here in Cambodia. So taking the confrontation out, and it's not like, oh, you do this, you don't do that, you don't do that. You know, it's like, no, but we do, but we do. Bringing all the actors in the room and say, okay, well, let's not talk about today, let's talk about tomorrow, you know, and how can we work together on that, was very, very deliberate in that. And also creating expectations that not everything you're dreaming right now is going to be the job of the government, or the other way around. Not everything that you hoping now is the job of the other side, right? It's everyone involved that has to work on that, and then it becomes a question of how well is that relationship and that working together managed, you know, that unfortunately I'm not involved in anymore. But yeah, I think there's definitely tension generally, especially when you have public administrators that do not understand creative practice.
Okay, yeah, okay. I guess it's the challenge, but if we don't try, there's no way to of course, to succeed and to get some. Any other questions? Someone no raising her hand. Then I have a question for Nancy, if I may, but it's a clarification question about the creator project. So you get these, who were the people coming about that? So it's not local people, I guess these are visitors. You said tourists, but is it people from, I mean, that get a commitment or link with the places they went to?
The projects themselves were all created by people who live permanently in the, or at this time, and in those locations. So we actually banned any applications from city-based organizations that wanted to travel out into the countryside to bring visitors there. So that it was something that was rooted very much in the locality and what the residents wanted to do. Or at least some of the residents, because of course there's diverse attitudes sometimes. The participants in the projects that they put on, there was a piece of research that went with that. Some of them were local, some of them were national, looking for something to do on the weekend, and some were international, traveling through Portugal. One of the issues we discovered was marketing, and actually because it was an R&D stage, having things ready ahead of time enough to be able to promote properly as well. So the international folks happened to be in the country already, whereas we know that other initiatives with and part of it was just, again, we mentioned the different cultures of places, but different cultures of how different systems operate. So the tourism department, the tourism world works with lots and lots of advanced scheduling of travelers into certain places in general. That's changing, of course, but and the cultural small micro entrepreneurs who usually wanted to create a network of people locally to help them found it very complex, of course, to plan that far ahead of when it happened. And so we see that, and also we had mentioned different cultures of how so anyway, this is beyond your question. But also as you mentioned, government, some of our participants were from government, were from local government and municipalities, and that's not the same as dealing with politics at a national level, but we definitely felt there were different worldviews coming into conversations with artists, with cultural entrepreneurs and tourism entrepreneurs. They never talked to each other. That was one of the things we also noticed, is the importance of having these spaces for them to meet each other. They live in different worlds, they talk different languages, really, and they think differently, and they're looking for the KPIs and things like this. And we noticed that with tourism, well into the project, we had one municipal employee who was one of our supporters in doing something, say, you're doing it all wrong, that you should have told us what the theme was about, and then we would make something to address that theme. So it'd be a top-down model of developing streams and thematic routes, because that's what they're used to, versus what we realized in this conversation. We were taking a cultural development approach. We wanted everybody to independently come up and tell us what would be the most meaningful way of sharing how they understand their place and the talents and the, and we couldn't imagine doing a top-down version of that. That would be interesting to anyone. But it was like somewhere in the midst of all these conversations did we realize that the worldview that was coming in was different. It helped us clarify what we were intentionally doing, but it was, yeah. So at a more national level, or what Kai's dealing with, or even Sabrina, we were lucky in that we didn't directly engage with politicians, that's to my knowledge. So now with In Situ, they're part of the larger milieu in each of the regions, but it's definitely.
That makes me, it's there are other European Horizon, for example, project related to that. I think about bee culture that has been, and you probably know, and there are link about that, and facing the same issues, because cultural and tourism is not always the same. I mean, together, and so there again we need to be mediator, as I told about. Yeah, so.
Same within our project, tourism is coming in not as an intent within in situ. It's not a topic of our project, but we see it creeping into the sides of the case studies as they're trying to find ways of becoming viable entities, but not to overshadow. It's the same with the market, not to overshadow what they want to do, but to find a workable way of incorporating that. But in some cases, they have nothing to do with tourism, and we'll see. But I'm sure that what we are planting the seeds of within the project is not at all what the European Commission thought they would be supporting when it was about innovation and competitiveness of cultural industries. And so in terms of, us coming up against what they might have expected us to be developing, it's going to, so far so good. And we're reflecting the I guess realities that are much more diverse than the narrow thinking of the high technology and city-based industrial development. But
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for having given all the, I see that on the chat everyone can maybe copy and make to have more information about in situ and creator. I see all the difference, right? As Sabrina, you still there? Yeah, but just also a clarification about, but this is the economist speaking about that, about the last impact analysis about the festival there. Is that is that made using what cost benefit analysis or a contingent, or do you make a survey about that, or do you could you be more explicit about just
Yes,
the ways that you get the outcomes? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They use direct survey and qualitative and both qualitative and quantitative approach. And when we look at things qualitatively, also the goal for the study was to uncover underlying issue, for example, the different profiles that were in the territory. We use also ethnographic portraits to highlight different dimensions. But at the end, yes, it was a very classic method, so focus groups and interviews.
Yeah, okay.
But at the end of the day, we find ourselves without a shared framework, accepted method. So we use methods from, advisory cabinets and I think we really need to take the time to think about more the tools. And you say the methodology. Yes, it's about the methodology. And I would like to thank Kai for expressing the idea also more clearly, because indeed there's a moment of tension, not just about the numbers, but in how we perceive and how we fundamentally understand the activity in itself. It's not just about funding, it's about understanding the risk, the nature of the risk that is inherent to our activity.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I don't know if someone wants to add something at that stage. I don't see any more question. I just have there on the chat also a practical question by Lisbeth about the next webinar, because the next webinar could be related to what the discussion that we have just here. It will be held on November 14th, so in about a month. At the same time, and it will be on cultural entrepreneurship and the art of juggling financial uncertainties. And so it is not really different about what we discuss here, because we really need to have another sort of language or another sort of to speak in different ways to investors or fans. I truly believe that there is place there to have another another kind of table where we could sit around for to the benefit of culture. So that will be on next. And Lisbeth, don't hesitate to take contact with Seaship. You go on Google Seaship and Brussels, something like that, and you will see, of course, the recording about this webinar, the past webinar, and the date of the two next webinar. The next one will be being November 14. If there is nothing else there, I would like just to thank you for this interesting contribution. Thank you, Guy, Nancy, Sabrina, and everyone, and Karen also. We don't see Karen, but there is no. Karen is really dealing there with all the intricacies of Seaship, and thank you, Karen, again. And then we will, okay, maybe meet again. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you, Christian.
and see you maybe another time. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day.